Have you ever had someone in your life who you've heard so much about, never actually met, that they've ended up almost gaining cult status in your mind? Bruce Breslau has been that for me, so I was excited when, through a mutual friend and a little bit of messaging, Bruce agreed to chat with me for Life Journey. Bruce has led a most interesting life and has been behind some of our most memorable television jingles. He also knows how to live a good life filled with authenticity, compassion, humour and kindness. Bruce shares so much wisdom with me during our chat, so I hope you enjoy listening to his tales as much as I did. I have been thinking, I cannot believe that it's been nearly 40 years since I worked at Channel 10, or started working there, I suppose, but I can't believe that 40 years later, here I am sitting in my lounge room talking to the famous Breslau.
Oh, no. Far from it. Well, I mean, we're here, but fame eludes me. It's very interesting. Time flies, and it's funny when I was thinking back on my time with TVO and my time in Brisbane, going back and forth over a few years. All these peripheral characters then start coming into view, like Peter Hackworth and Cat's Tango.
Yes.
Mike introduced me to a wonderful animator by the name of Max Bana. I don't know, and I've got drawings and cells that he gave me back in probably 87 or 86. Just all these other, John Stainton, just amazing people, amazing times. Looking back, I mean, I've had many different careers. I was in advertising and music, and before that, actually in radio and on air and advertising sales in radio. And then, as you get gray, advertising goes one way and you go another. And I'd always flown airplanes. I started flying at 17. That's another thing I have in common with Ian. He's a pilot. And I finished off my instructor's certificates in the 90s and started teaching people to fly airplanes. I'm still current on that. And then in the beginning of the 2000s, my parents both got ill. They had retired down to Florida, and a couple of very unattractive healthcare issues. And in my mid-50s, I went back to law school and to specialize in healthcare law, and finished law school at 58. And I worked for the LA District Attorney's Office for a short while in their elder abuse division, prosecuting it, not causing it, thankfully. And then a couple of end of life and hospice projects rather. And I'm now at a very large nonprofit as an ombuds, basically mediating and arbitrating escalated complaints and issues that come up through the year. But here's the thing: you can't look back and say, if only I had done X, Y, and Z, or what would have happened if I had stayed there? Because you wrote that story. You wrote that life story. And I think you got to get to 40 or so until you realize you're actually writing this amazing story. And the fact of the matter is, you can't live regret. There are so many people that, if only I hadn't bought that, or if only I'd taken that job, or if only I'd done this. But then you would have done all these other things. And you need to be thankful for the experience you had when you had it.
And I mean, every now and again, things mightn't be going so well and you think, what am I doing? But, at the end of the day, in your heart, one of my favourite quotes is, remember why you started. And, I just love that, because it takes you back to, right, why did I start doing this? Where was I at? What was my plan? And why did I think this was, important to me? And, the other thing, Bruce, I have started recently, and I've learned so much through listening to people and hearing their stories, and I'm in the box seat. I just am so grateful. But I've started to realise, some mornings you wake up and you might be a bit resentful or crabby or, something. Anyway, I just think to myself, what am I going to bring to the world today? What am I going to put into the world? Am I going to put unhappiness, crabbiness, resentment, or am I going to put love, happiness, and and kindness and compassion out there. And that is a really good way to change your mood.
Whenever I hear the Carole King song Beautiful, which begins, you've got to get up every morning with a smile on your face and show the world all the love in your heart.
You got to get up every morning with a smile on your face and show the world all the love in your heart.
And if you get up to that song, it's going to change your attitude right there. And yes, there are times you don't get through this without disappointment, pain, struggle, unfortunate experiences, death, destruction, but also success, wins, sunshine, and wonderful people. So it's hard sometimes to dig yourself out of a bit of a hole, but you have to do, well, you don't have to do it. Sometimes people just stay there, and it's very unfortunate. It's very unfortunate.
Yeah.
It's interesting. You look back on your Brisbane experience, and I look back on my advertising days, and I don't think anything since has been as collaborative and fun. In my mind now, I was a kid. I was in my late 20s and then early 30s, and I was a kid in a candy store. I was working in the top studios in New York, producing music, traveling around the country and then around the world, working with great, fun people, and producing with really wonderfully talented people here in New York and then Los Angeles. And obviously, flight instruction is not as collaborative as that. It's a very different reward that you get. Law is a very different reward, also collaborative, but on a lot more serious level. And the work I do now is I do a lot of writing, and I speak to a lot of people, and you get a lot of different opinion. But those days, and I'm not looking at it through rose-colored glasses, they were an enormous amount of fun. I never for a second actually thought, this is just a real slog, even with the worst clients. And even your competitors, Kelly, if you were competing for a job and you made a presentation and you put your heart and soul into this presentation, and a competitor that you knew got the gig, you'd look at them like, oh my God, that stuff is great. And even your worst enemy had some color and interest and humor to them. It became a little drab once advertising changed. And that had to do with a lot of, corporate mergers and takeovers and the like. And the kinds of work we were doing also, in many cases, were telling stories. And they were commercials and promos, but they were longer. They weren't quick 5 and 10 second pieces. They, in many cases, might have been 60 seconds up to 3 minutes, the kinds of things we were doing. So all very interesting.
It's interesting how you go through life and something happens that motivates you to take another path, and doesn't it? It's amazing, really.
And it's interesting. When I was going to law school, and I was instructing during the day and going to law school for 4 years at night. And when my husband and I would go to a wedding reception, and we'd be making small talk with the folks we meet there. And what are you doing? Well, I teach people to fly airplanes during the day, and I go to law school at night. And people would say, oh, I've always wanted to go to law school. And I go, and? Well, the cost and the time commitment and the studying and the tests and the reading. I said, but you're looking at it too comprehensively, too large. If you really want to go to law school, what's the first thing you would have to do in this country? And they look and they go, I don't know. Well, how are you going to get in? What law school are you going to apply to? Oh, you have to take the admissions test. I go, yeah, it's called the LSAT, Law School Admission Test. I said, why don't you find a community college, pay your $300 to do an LSAT prep test, go through the prep for the LSAT, take the LSAT, and see what kind of a score you get. And that score is going to kind of dictate where you can go to law school. Are you Harvard or are you where I went? But that said, small doses. Don't look at, oh, it's going to cost $100,000 and it's going to be 4 years of my time and I got kids and I got a job. Just, I want to get through the LSAT. And then take it from there. Then it's now let's apply to some law schools and see what happens. Maybe you won't get in. Maybe you will. So I don't want to call them baby steps, but they're small steps that eventually take you in the direction in which you need to go.
Yeah. And that is how we should look at life, isn't it? Because I think we all fall into the trap of looking at the big picture and making things
too much
bigger than they need to be right now.
Too
and
much,
that stops us from doing so much, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, when you moved back to your home, it was kind of like, it wasn't a retreat. It was like, my husband's motto is nothing is forever. And mine is, okay, what's next? As much as I enjoy talking about, working at TVO and then elsewhere through Australia, New Zealand, following Mike through his various escapades, I'm not nostalgic. I don't sit here looking at old albums going, oh, that was great. That was great. I'm always looking to the next day and seeing what the next challenge is. And even at this ridiculous age, feeling that there's some special stuff ahead.
Yeah. Oh, I absolutely agree. Like, I know people who retire and they're just sitting around waiting to die, and yet they've got, 20 or 30 years, or how do we know?
I work for a nonprofit that addresses and advocates for people 50 plus. And our mission statement is empower people to choose how they live as they age. And when friends tell me they're retiring, I usually say, what are you going to do on Tuesday? Because Monday sounds like, okay, I can take it easy. What are you going to do on Tuesday? And if they say something along the lines of, oh, I've always wanted to do, volunteer for a literacy organization. Okay, so you want to teach either young or adult people how to read? Yeah. Do you need any certification to do that? I think so. Get the certification before you retire. Do that on the weekends or at night. Get the certification so that when you're bored on Wednesday, you can go right to it. I've seen people who've retired and or have been forced into retirement that don't really have a what's next plan or something to do. And then you find that, what'd you do today, Bob? Oh, I got to the bank and then like the dry cleaners, and the day fills up, I guess. And they start kind of retracting from life, kind of it withdrawing. And it's not intentional. It happens quicker than one would think, but it's not nice to see.
Mm-hmm. And you have to keep your mind active, but you also have to keep your body active and young, don't you? Because
Dog. You got cattle. I got a dog.
We actually have 4 dogs.
Oh my God. No.
4 pets.
The wire hair fox terrier is plenty for me, and it's we live in a 2-bedroom townhouse, and he's perfect size, but needs to be walked quite a distance every day.
Yeah. Oh, that's moving. Yeah. And animals do bring so much into your life. Bruce, getting back to your like when you were working in advertising, so what were some of your favourite jingles that you did?
Well, our specialization and where I really came alive was at a company called Frank Gehry Productions in Connecticut, in Greenwich, Connecticut. And Frank was a small shop. It was him and a couple of arrangers, but he had produced music for Good Morning America, these major campaigns for the networks here, ABC, CBS, NBC, HBO, Showtime, Phil Donahue, Oprah Winfrey. And it was all coming out of this one-man shop. And I had previously worked for a large music syndication company out of Dallas and had been on the road for that company. And in those days, I had a territory Maine down through the Carolinas, which is about a 1,200-mile distance. And I would call on 3 radio or 3 TV stations a day, selling them music, jingles and music for their newscasts and the like. And the travel gets to you after a while. And on a freelance lyric project, I met up with Frank in a studio one day, and he played me his demo, and I'm going, who's selling all this stuff for you? And it was like, well, it's just me and another outside salesman. I go, he goes, where have you worked? And I mentioned the name of the company, which had a really good reputation for syndication. And he said, yeah, let's talk. And the next day I was up in his office, and 2 months later I was managing his company. It wouldn't be anything that would resonate with folks in Australia, but the great stuff that I worked on there was very large ABC fall campaigns, which were just amazing for a 28-year-old kid. I'd work in this office in Greenwich, Connecticut, from 10 to 4, and drive into Manhattan and go into A&R recording where there'd be 50 or 60 musicians, and then 6 singers, quintuple tracking, and singing lyrics that you'd worked on, and then you just hear this come together, and it was truly Kid in a Candy Store. The materials that I worked on for Australia, and the way Mike and I met. Every June there was a big promotion conference. It was the Broadcast Promotion and Marketing Executives in those days, BPME, and then that became Promax. And all the promotion directors internationally would come into whatever city they were holding the conference. And on this particular year, Mike had come in and seen something that I had worked on at Frank's for a station in Detroit, Channel 7. And we had written this campaign, Stand Up and Telling You're from Detroit. And it had won awards. And Mike saw its application in Brisbane for TVO, and had called the office and had gotten our outside sales rep. And we were working on a new lyric for Stand Up and Tell Them Brisbane's Great. Independently, my sophomore roommate from college and I had been planning a trip to Australia and New Zealand. So that was June of '87, I want to say. And we were planning our trip for October. And in dealing with the financial and the contractual aspects of this program, I'm on the phone with Mike, and I said, oh, by the way, I'll be in Brisbane on October. He goes, what? I go, I'll be in Brisbane in October with Chuck Sievertson from our ABC News. You're going to be here. I go, yeah. He goes, where are you staying? I go, I haven't made those arrangements. Don't make any arrangements. We'll take care of everything. And I left that company shortly thereafter, went to another music company, and Mike followed me. And we did a fan song for the Brisbane Broncos. Let's go Broncos.
We got the teamwork to make the dream work. Let's go. Let's go Broncos.
So you did that?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I never knew that, Bruce.
Yeah. So it's very important. You don't work for companies, you work for people. And I followed Mike, and Mike followed me. So after Let's Go Broncos, I was hired by a company, moved out to Los Angeles, was with them for about 6 months, and then went freelance. And Mike had left Australia and had gone down to TVNZ. I put together a team. We went down there. We put together a promo for One Network News called Watch Your World with Us.
Many worlds, one news, one network news. at midday, 6 and 9:35.
Watch your world with us. Watch.
Which won a gold medallion at Promax that year, and campaigned for TVNZ TV1. Together We're One.
Together we'll see New Zealand. Greet a brand new day. Everyone, together we're one.
Which was on the network for a decade, which is unheard of. And then following his stay at TVNZ, Mike went up to Optus, and we produced a variety of material, both programming and promotion for Optus Television.
All this good stuff all intersected. Aren't you glad that you got connected? One word, one world, you got the best. Yes, Optus, yes.
And just had a blast. And what was interesting, though, I remember when we went down to New Zealand, I think people are always like, well, how do these things travel? How do you produce for another country? And that's always interesting because Mike always had theories about things. Obviously, there was a lot of American programming that traveled over there. And in the 80s, Cheers was a very big sitcom here in the States. And apparently it didn't do very well in Australia at all. And yet there are two other sitcoms that I swear I didn't think would travel at all, which were The Nanny and Seinfeld, both of which did very well in both New Zealand and Australia. Mm-hmm. And I didn't get that at all. And I think part of it is, if you watch Seinfeld, I told you, his parents are sort of sketchy versions of my parents. These were people I knew. These were my people. Mm-hmm. I think in Down Under, they were just kind of cartoon characters. That seemed kind of interesting. Yeah. And so when it came to advertising, in the day, we would actually take concepts. If it were music, we would go down and re-record with Australian musicians and Australian singers. And once again, this is one of those linkages. I'm still Facebook friends with the guy who was our engineer initially back in the 80s, a great guy named Brent Clark, who also was a big recording engineer. There's a group down there, Midnight Oil.
Yep.
He was their engineer. He was here a few years ago. He'd won an Emmy on some music he'd recorded for a kids show down there. And I'm also very good friends with his sister Lisa, who's an editor for one of the newspapers in London. So, but for Mike Latin, yeah. I wouldn't be connected to these great people. Yeah. Anyway, we would record with local talent, and we always had an ear to things. New Zealand was a very interesting challenge for us on one instance. When Mike hired us, we are now producing this campaign for with the One Network News, which is like their major newscast, and we now are auditioning for a voiceover. So there are a couple of voiceover agents down there, and we send our copy through, and we get, about 20 submissions, one of whom was a woman. Now, keep in mind, this would have been 1999, maybe. Mm-hmm. So not terribly, I'd like to think, here in this country where we had female VO for years and years and years, it didn't seem inappropriate. And we're listening to this voiceover. Her name was Truda Chadwick, and she was a jazz singer.
And though you know me well, anyone can tell you don't know.
And she had a wonderful, smoky voice. But the thing is, I'm from Brooklyn, New York, and grew up on Long Island. I'm never going to be able to judge a really good voiceover regionally or internationally. And so my creative partner and I were down there. We heard 5 or 6 voices we really liked. And then we go to present. I think we had 3 finalists. And news director, assistant news director, manager of the network. And we get to Truda's, and she gets maybe a sentence and a half in, and they're like, "It's a woman." And I'm like, "Yeah." "Oh, well, this is a news promo." I go, "Yeah, it is. How can you have a woman on a news promo?" I go, "That she sounds really good." she sells the product really well. I think she's a lot. Well, that second guy was good, but they were so flustered because whatever they said, they couldn't deny that she was the best on the read. Turns out the assistant news director there pushed for her, and she had a small side career as TVNZ VO voiceover. But for the gay Jew from Brooklyn. Now, after that, we do this big campaign for TV1. Together We're One. And when I went down there to initially research what they were looking for, they said, we have a Maori programming department, and our Maori population is very important. Oh, good. So we do this massive campaign. Together We're One, big anthem that everybody loved. Well, most people loved. I'm sure there are people down there that didn't love it. And a year later now, we're looking to refresh the campaign. And I was like, you mentioned how the Maori department, your Maori program is very important. And they went, yeah. So how do you say Together We're One in Maori? And I got like blank stares on the phone. What? I go, have you not, does it not translate? Are you not promoting your Maori programming using that campaign? Oh, you'll have to speak to the Maori department. And I get this guy in the Maori department. I go, the big campaign that they show and the Together, oh, yeah. I go, how do you say Together We're One in Maori? And it was like, Tū Ngāti Tato. Not to, okay, could that be somehow turned into a Maori chant? I guess you could say, Ngātihi tu Ngātihi tato, Ngātihi tu Ngātihi tato. Yeah. So I go with my music partner, we arrange this chant that now goes through the entire second season of this promotion. And we had a Maori group in studio that Brent was mixing in New Zealand, and it's great, it's wonderful. So, but it's interesting because we were doing work in Germany, and we were staying at a Hyatt hotel in Cologne, and the network was about 4 miles to the west, off of Aachenerstrasse in a big building. But I saw when I got there, there's a number 1 tram that goes right from the hotel to about 500 yards from the network. So although I had a car, I said, I'm going to take the tram. And so I take the tram and I get to this network and we're talking about the campaign and it's time to break for lunch. And I was like, how did you get here? Did you drive your car? I go, no, how did you get here? I took the number eins tram. The tram. I go, why did you ride the tram? Because I wanted to sit with the audience. I wanted to hear what they were talking about. I wanted to see what they were reading and hear if they were talking about any of your programming. And they were. And to me, if you're driving a Mercedes and it's 1 per car, you can look at ratings all you want, but you're not hanging out with the audience. So when you say, what were the favorite projects you worked on? I liked working big music projects in New York when I was with Frank Gehry. I loved working out. These were not problems, they were challenges. They were part of a puzzle. And people would say one thing, well, that Maori audience is very important. Great. How do you say this in Maori? I don't know. Well, then we have to make them important. And we have to make this important. That's an important part of the promotion. You're saying, come with us on RTL, and yet you're never writing with the audience. So let's listen to some people. And this is more than just like focus group. This is actually just being part of who you're broadcasting to, you know. So.
And that, you know, that makes common sense, but it's people don't think like that, do they, Bruce? So it takes
not then and not now necessarily. I mean, there's a lot of data these days, but there's not a lot of there's a lot of high tech and not a lot of high touch. And I think that I think there's a mid ground that we need to. I mean, you need to use the data. You need to interpret the data in order to get to where you want to be, but you can't just go by numbers alone, because numbers can skew, numbers can be erroneous. You can play with numbers.
Bruce, I want to talk about your humour, because I'm a bit of a trickster, and I know you have played some big tricks and on a far grander scale than I could ever imagine. So,
they're grand and small, and once again, it was only because we were once again internationally working with one of the best in the business, Mike Lattin. From the get-go, Mike loved a good joke. Mike loved a good gotcha. He could take as well as he could give. Early on, against me, we were down from Brisbane to Sydney, and you know, in the day you would dress suit and tie for everything. So we were doing meetings at 10 Network in Sydney, and we do this one day, and then we go to dinner, and then about to go back to my room, and Mike goes, "Okay, tomorrow morning down here at 8 o'clock." Okay, what's the dress? Same dress. Okay. I get down there at 8 o'clock. I'm in my suit and tie, and Mike is in shorts and a singlet. And I go, "What happened?" "Oh, no, I'll change right after breakfast." So we have breakfast, and he goes, "Follow me." And we hop into a taxi cab. We're at the Regent Hotel in Sydney, hop into a taxi cab, and the cab takes us to a pier in Darling Harbour. And we get on this boat. And now it's somewhere around 10:30 in the morning, and the boat goes out as just me in this suit and tie, and Mike in his shorts and singlet. Comes around into the harbor, into Circular Quay. And now all these stars from Neighbours and other sitcoms on the 10 network start coming about. It was a public relations thing for the 10 network. And they're all in bathing suits and T-shirts. And I'm in a three-piece with a vest, three-piece suit and a tie. Like, Guy Pearce looks at me and goes, "What are you doing?" I go, "I'm opening up a branch of Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner, and Smith in the middle of the harbor." Mike just thought that was the funniest. And he's got a picture of all these people in swimming attire and me in the three-piece suit and tie. So
that was very typical.
Now Mike is coming to New York for the Promax conference in June. Mike, I want to see Phantom of the Opera. It literally had just opened in New York. Tickets were impossible to get. But the guy that ran the recording studio had all these Broadway contacts. I get 2 center front mezzanine seats. And in the day, I had just read an article in the New York Times how the Jumbotron, this big, huge screen in the middle of Times Square, for $50, you could put up any message you want. Happy birthday, happy anniversary, will you marry me, all this stuff. And I figure, okay, we'll go to dinner. It's 7:30 in the evening, still daylight, get something up there about Mike, but what should we put up? So I called Barbara, Mike's wife. "Barbara, if I could put up a message in the middle of Times Square that would get Mike, what would that be?" And she laughs. I go, what is it? She goes, well, several years ago, he it was when he was it was in his drinking days. I didn't know him in his drinking days. He had stopped long before I met him. But there was a friend whose 6-year-old was having a birthday party, and Mike had ordered a donkey to show up just on their front lawn, uninvited. And the donkey caused all kinds of havoc. It wasn't apparently a pleasant birthday party with this ass, if you will. So it turns out the guy owned the advertising company for all the cabs in town, for all the ad signs on top of the taxi cabs in town. And he spent some of his own money and had some placards, some advertising placards written up that just said, "Who is Mike Latin?" and put him on these cabs. And what was happening over a course of about 3 months is that people were getting out of pubs like very late, having tied one on, and they'd see that. Who's Mike Latin? And they'd call directory assistants and get Mike Latin's phone number. And they'd be calling Barb at 3 in the morning and 4 in the morning for like 3 months. These calls are coming in. Hi, is Mike Latin there? Who is he? You know? So Barbara just said, just put up, who is Mike Latin? So I arrange, I contract for a very specific time because it's only up there for 30 seconds. And we have dinner, and I'm with my friend, I mentioned Chuck, who knows Mike from our original trip over to Australia. And we leave this restaurant on West 48th Street, and we go into the middle of Times Square, and it's a beautiful June evening, and it's Broadway rush hour with the cabs and the people walking from dinner to the theater. And I stop him right in the center of the square there. And I said, stop. And Mike goes, what? I go, just look around. This is amazing. The lights, the sound, the action. Is this not the best city in the world? And he goes, you're up to something, Breslau. I go, what do you mean? I've never seen you stand still for more than 3 seconds. I go, no, it's just the taxis and the cars and the people and your name up there and lights. And he turns around, and I've never seen a grin. Who is Mike Latin? And Chuck snapped some pictures. So he had also, part of the deal is there was a photographer somewhere else that took that picture and then sent him a poster, which he had in his office. But years later, people would look at that and they'd go, oh, you photoshopped that. No, this was actually done. So now,
photoshopping.
Yeah. And then it would be like my turn. One of the last big ones I did for him, he called me and said, I like suppose stocking hosiery. There were socks, men's socks called Sup Hose, SUPPHOSE. So support hose for men. And Mike liked this from years ago. He was very brand loyal, loved Brooks Brothers shirt. He turned me on to Brooks Brothers shirts. He loved support hose. Well, now I start calling around to see where, and the brand had gone out of business and had been bought out, but they had them at like one of the department stores here that has since gone out of business. And so I got like 200 pair. And everywhere he went on his trip in Los Angeles, because I had his itinerary, he'd go to a restaurant, Latin, 5 o'clock, and the maitre d' would have 2 pairs of support hose for him. He'd check into the hotel and they'd have 10 pairs of support hose for him. Everywhere he went, everywhere, there was support hose.
Oh, gosh. Bruce, I want to talk to you about the not-for-profits that you've been involved with. And I gather from reading about you that you and from your actions how important it is for you to give back. So talk me through a little bit about the not-for-profits and why you give back to so many.
It's interesting. I think people have at least in this country, have a kind of a mental separation of like commercial or for-profit entities and nonprofit entities, and they really don't have to be separate. Your life's work can be productive in commercial entity and in nonprofit, or can be counterproductive in a nonprofit entity as well. I grew up in a family. My mom was very involved in our synagogue. We always, charity. We were not necessarily pious, but it was part of life. In this country, Halloween, we have trick or treating, and in the day, there was you'd go with your trick or treat bag as a kid. You dress up in I guess down under they call it fancy dress and in costume. And you'd have your bag that people would put in candy for trick or treat. But you also had an orange box for coins, mostly pennies. And this was trick or treat for UNICEF. And so even in our schools, you'd get your candy, and families would know that, oh, it's Halloween. I got to get those little Hershey bars, and I got to go to the bank to get some penny rolls because they're going to be coming around trick or treating for UNICEF. And so you would raise money for kids who were unfortunate in other countries. When I went to school for broadcasting, one of the first things we learned was how broadcast properties in this country were regulated at that time. And television and radio stations were licensed to operate in, the acronym was PICON, operate in the public interest, convenience, or necessity. So even though I was going to become a commercial broadcaster, on some level, you're operating in the public interest. Now, do you do that as a top 40 disc jockey? Well, you're giving some people some entertainment. The first good small market radio station I worked for in Ithaca, New York, WTKO, this would have been summer of 1975, won a Billboard Award as one of the best small market stations in the country because we were a top 40 station, but we also had an amazing news department, an amazing sports department, an amazing public affairs department. And we keep in mind, Ithaca is a small town, but it's also got Cornell University and Ithaca College. So you've got quite a bit of smart intellect, people not only searching for entertainment, but for decent news and journalistic product. And I believe that the radio station delivered that. When that kind of disappeared from broadcasting, or at least my broadcasting arena, I just started searching for other things. While I was doing that, I was volunteering for a project. I'll tell you how I got to Project Angel Food, which is still a very vital nonprofit here in the Los Angeles area. They were created at the dawn of the AIDS epidemic to provide healthy meals to those suffering from HIV/AIDS. And I want to say about 5 or 8 years ago, they opened it up now to anybody with a homebound illness. And currently, I think they do around 2,000 meals a day.
Wow.
And they've been doing that. They've served over 1 million meals over the years. How I got there, actually, was in late 93, early 94, my business was going south. I was really, like yourself, you decided to go home. I wasn't terribly taken with the turn that advertising and broadcasting had been taking. And I had broken up. I had a 9-month relationship, and we broke up around Christmas time. And then in January of 94, the Northridge earthquake hit. And my chimney fell into my neighbor's house, and my entire neighborhood was decimated. And it was like my entire life was shaken up. I'd broken up, my business was going down the tubes, and now my house was in shambles. So I did what any sane individual could do, and I left the country for a month. I went to Argentina. Okay. And I got back some peace and quiet, and went down to Tierra del Fuego and went to see icebergs calve into the sea at the end of the planet, and it was beautiful. And I come back to Los Angeles and found that on the second day of my departure, my 94 Mustang 5.0 convertible was stolen. And what had been a 94 Mustang 5.0 convertible was now a 94 Mustang Planter. And totally parted out and destroyed. So I called a friend who had worked in the business, the TV business prior, and who I'd gone to college with for TV, who had become a therapist, actually. And I said, Ginny, I need some help. I'd like to see a therapist, but I also know that there are a lot of charlatans in the business or people that are not terribly qualified. And she actually turned me on to one of her teachers who became a lifesaver for me. And very early on in our sessions, she asked me, when was the last time you felt valid in the work you do or happy in the work you do? And I said, and that was an easy one. I said, oh, that was when I was a disc jockey back at WTKO. Every morning at 9 o'clock, we did lost dog and cat reports on the radio. And I knew for that small amount of time, I was putting people together with their pets that they lost. And that was great. And she goes, oh, you need to go volunteer somewhere. Oh, okay. And I'm quite suggestive. So I said, suggestive, actually. So I said, suggestions? And she goes, do you know Project Angel Food? I go, yeah, they make meals for people with HIV/AIDS. She says they've got a training every Wednesday in Hollywood. So the following Wednesday, I go to this training. And the following Monday, I go to a satellite office in the San Fernando Valley, which is about 10 miles from where their main office is in Hollywood. And I go there at noon, and I'm a driver. And every Monday, I'm to pick up 15 to 20 meals, and I get a list of addresses, and I deliver these lunches for people. And so I was still working in advertising, but every Monday, I would become the Domino's pizza guy. And some people don't want to talk. They just want the meal. Sometimes, it's just a hand around the door reaching. Sometimes people are like, you're the only personal contact they're having that week. So I did that for Project Angel Food every Monday for 8 years.
Wow.
And in year number 8, so that was June of 94, April of 94. Now we're April of 2002, okay? And the woman who runs the satellite office says, we have our Angel Awards, our big fundraiser in August, and we are saluting Eric McCormick of Will and Grace and his wife, Janet. And it's a huge Hollywood fundraiser, $1,000 a plate. That's where they make a lot of money at this fundraiser. And this manager says to me, they've got all this material produced for Eric, obviously, but they have nothing for Janet. And I know you work in advertising. Can you produce something for Janet? Absolutely. So I go home. I've got these Sinatra karaoke CDs, and I re-lyric "The Lady is a Tramp" to "The Lady is a Champ." And we shoot all the Valley volunteers singing these lyrics. So fast forward to August 15th. The event is on the 17th. August 15th, and I get a call from this manager and says, oh, they love what you did. We've got a couple of extra seats. Would you like to come to the awards? I go, yeah, sure. So I go. Friend was in from out of town. He donated a little bit. We go. And they seated me and Chuck at the Project Angel Food table. And I was seated next to a guy who ran their baking department. His name was Eric Salazar. And we kind of hit it off. And I gave him my card. And I said, if you'd like, at the time, maybe it's a bit presumptuous. I said, I own an airplane. Would you like to go flying somewhere? I get a call a few days later. He goes, yeah, I'd like to go fly. Well, Eric's my husband. That's how I met him.
Oh, wow.
And,
you did go flying. Oh.
Yeah. He calls me, and we meet him at Van Nuys Airport, and we fly out to Santa Barbara for our first date, and we have a beautiful lunch up there and go up to the top of the courthouse and fly back. And we get back to the airport, to Van Nuys Airport, And Eric had never been in his, Eric thought he had really hit it big, like I had a Learjet or something. He was, sorry, can only give you a pipe for Comanche. We go back to the airport, and we hadn't seen each other's cars because we both drove independently. We come out, and I have at the time a 96 Audi A4 in pearlescent white. And he had a 96 Audi A4 in emerald green. And it wasn't a well-known car at the time, right? Fast forward a few months later, we're now, we're dating. I think by that time he's probably moved into the house in Northridge. And he calls me one day at work. He goes, "You won't believe what happened." I go, "What?" He goes, do you remember going to a volunteer appreciation brunch in Burbank a few years ago? I said, "Oh, the Pickwick Bowl?" He goes, "Yeah." Or maybe it was the House of Blues, one of those. I go, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, I was there, and my friend Robert was there, and he was on a buffet. He was at the buffet table getting food, and I took a picture of him. But you're out of focus in the foreground of that picture. It's been sitting in my desk for like 6 years." So he had been working at Project Angel Food as long as I had been volunteering, but we were in two separate places.
Oh, wow. That's just amazing, isn't it? How, things are meant to be, aren't they?
Oh, so
Oh, my God.
people, and quite frankly, at the time, I was a gay man at 49, and you're you would think past your prime. And Eric is not wildly younger, but he's younger. But people of that age would ask me, "Well, how do you meet somebody?" And I would say, "Well, your business has to be going south. You have to have just suffered a breakup. There's got to be a major earthquake. You have to go to a therapist who tells you to volunteer, and then you have to volunteer for 8 years. But that's the formula, apparently."
Oh gosh, that's so much more complicated than these days with Tinder and all these dating
Grindr.
apps.
Yeah. No,
But
it was
far
yeah,
better and far more
involved.
organic.
Yeah, yes. What tech has brought us is amazing. But while I was in advertising, and obviously I had worked in radio and done some voiceover work, there was an organization nationally called Recordings for the Blind and Dyslexic, and went to volunteer there. And unlike audiobooks, where it's one person basically reading a novel or a nonfiction book, these are textbooks for a variety of blind and dyslexic or vision impaired students, elementary, junior, senior high school, and university students. And you would show up for a shift on a Wednesday at 7. The shifts were 2 hours. And now you're reading a history textbook. Or the worst assignments where you'd get there and the manager of the location would look at you and they go, "Can you do me a favor?" And you'd go, "Oh, not an index, not an index." And then we're almost finished with this book. And you would literally be reading an index, Sean, Kelly, pages 75 through 78. Sherman, Robert, pages 103 to 109, the entire index. But it was very interesting because it was all on reel to reel that eventually was transferred to tape. And after you'd read a page, you would hit a button that would put a 1,000 kilohertz tone on the tape. And after you completed a chapter, you would hit the button twice. So somebody that wanted to get to like chapter 5 could fast forward and listening here, boop, 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 and now you're at chapter 5.
I mean, it's such an important thing to do.
Now that's done basically by computers. And the unfortunate thing was you would get there, and if there's a 400-page textbook, that could have been read by 40 or 50 different volunteers. Mm-hmm. So you would put the headphones on and listen to the last page. And in most cases, you'd go, "Oh, those poor blind people." But you're going to give your best. You're going to give your best on the 100 Years' War right now. And in a very, very strange turn of events, My manager, who hired me at the nonprofit where I am now, is blind.
Oh,
And
wow.
she saw that on my resume and said, "What years were you doing this?" And I gave her the years, and she goes, I could have listened to one of your, well,
Oh,
I'm sorry, but yeah, you could have.
yeah.
So,
Wow.
once again, connections in a weird way.
Yeah.
Uh, I've always flown planes since I was 17. There's an organization here called Angel Flight West, and there was a companion organization at the time called Air Lifeline, where you would basically fly patients from distant areas. It was kind of like flying doctor's service where they would fly out to the outback. In this case, you would fly out to where people needed treatment from larger universities and bring them from like Eugene, Oregon to UCLA in Los Angeles. So sometimes it would be, and it would be a free service for these folks. They were financially in need, and they usually it was either for themselves or their children. So you'd fly up to, I remember flying as far as Ashland, Oregon, which is like 600 miles from here, and picking up a mother and her 4-year-old son who needed a treatment at UCLA Medical Center and
Mm,
flying them down here. So I
mm.
did that, once again, combining a passion of mine, which it was flight, with a charity, if you will.
We actually have Angel Flight in
Oh,
Australia too, which does very similar um, thing, is
yeah, it's
fly
great
people
work,
from
and
regional remote areas
and
to
and
the
from a,
city.
and from a pilot standpoint, if you get a pilot certificate and you've got some friends, you wind up going to the same places all the time. This actually helps your skill because, I've never been to Mono Lake before, and you plan a trip there and get there, and you just get to see some different things throughout the state or states or country, and
Mm,
you once again meet some interesting people.
mm, mm,
So we had that. And the nonprofit, I don't do charity work for them. They employ me currently. Is one of the nation's largest nonprofits working with seniors. So we work to advocate for Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security, our different programs for mostly senior citizens, and also advocate for things like livable communities and making it easier for people to live in their home as they age. People don't want to be taken away or have to commit to many cases, an assisted living facility or nursing home if they can avoid that. So we try to find ways to make communities more livable.
Bruce, through all your social justice work, I'm interested to talk to you about marginalised groups like,
Mhm.
and there's so many, there's civil rights movements,
Mhm.
the feminism
Mhm.
movements, the LGBTQ community.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
and when we first started talking, it was International Women's Day, and it got me thinking, how do we move forward? So my perception is that it just takes one person to be brave enough to stand up, and then that creates more people coming along. But what's your perception of it? How do we move forward? Because we have come such a long way in the
Oh, absolutely.
yeah.
I mean, I look back when I was living in New York in 1982 at the dawn of the AIDS epidemic, and my partner at the time, I remember we had gone to a comedy club in Manhattan, and we were driving back to our apartment in Queens. And I said to him, Mike, if there were ever like just a gay comedian who specialized in that topic, I think that guy or woman would be a huge hit. And he said, that will absolutely never happen. That will never happen in this country. And that's 42 years ago.
Mm.
And in that time, you've seen Ellen DeGeneres, you've seen Will and Grace. We've gotten through an AIDS epidemic. Mike, unfortunately, passed away from AIDS. It happens incrementally. Like anything important, it doesn't happen overnight. there is backlash, and you may take 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And it's extraordinarily encouraging. I was at a tournament over the weekend, a crossword tournament in Stamford, Connecticut. This is the first time I'd gone. This is like the mother of all crossword tournaments. It's a very fast and very smart room. And no, I don't finish in the top 10 or the top third or the top half. But it was an experience. And for the finals, and there's 800 participants. It's like the New York Marathon for crosswords. I'm sitting there, and there is a kid sits down next to me. And when I say kid, I do mean kid. And I said, "So you've been doing this for a while?" And he's got very nice accessories. And I'm saying, well, I think he may be on the path to the choir here. But I who knows these days? I don't want to make any assumptions. So we're talking, and I said, "So you've been doing crosswords for a while?" He goes, "Well, actually, I construct crosswords. I've been solving them for a little bit." I go, "Okay, well, that's great. How you doing? And are you in school?" He goes, "Yeah, I'm a sophomore in high school." So he's in 10th grade. He's 15. My competition. So I said, "How are you doing in school?" He goes, "Oh, okay, all A's." I go, "What subjects do you really like?" And he goes, "Oh, I like math, but I really love English literature. And I'm doing a paper right now on queer theory in English literature." And I'm like, okay, at 15, I think I was really excited that I was able to call WGBB radio on the phone and do a school scope report on my high school. But it was like, wow, you couldn't have heard that 10 years ago.
Oh, no.
So,
Bruce.
and yes, did we pave a way? I think anybody who hasn't lived closely through the AIDS epidemic and survived, it's very hard to understand what that time was like. COVID was like a little repeat in a different setting. But how does it happen? I'm a New York gay Jew, and when I would present, when I told you I had territories in the 70s, going down to the Carolinas, going down to the south of the United States. And I would hear radio station general managers tell Jew jokes and gay jokes. And, they're potential clients, and I'm unable to zip it. I'm not going to, throw my purse down. But, in my mind, I'm going, someday that will be not tolerated. I will tell you that when I worked at that I shouldn't say little, that small market radio station, WTKL, and after I was on the air, I went into advertising sales at that station. And of course, I'm the last salesman on the totem pole, and they give you the D list. And one day, the general manager of the station, a great guy, Bob Newman, comes in, and he gives me a call in. And he goes, "Yeah, this guy runs the Ithaca Board of Realtors. Go and try to sell him a package for all the realtors in Ithaca." All right. So I go into the guy's office, and I start presenting. I give him the rate card, and I start presenting, everybody knew that radio station. It was very popular. And he goes, "Well, the Board of Realtors doesn't buy any advertising, but you could go to the individual realtors with your rate card under our aegis and basically take the rate card and then Jew them down for a special rate." Now, I grew up in a neighborhood that was 99.3% Jewish. My high school was 50% Jewish, 50% Irish, and Italian Catholic. But I lived 20 minutes away from New York City, and you had everything around you. Everybody, every color, creed, religion, anything you'd want to see. So as diverse a background as you'd want to get. But I'd never heard that slogan, Jew 'em down. And I was at the time, was it 1970, 22, selling radio time. And I went, excuse me? And he said, your rate, the rate's that, and you Jew them down. You Jew them down to a lower rate. I go, I've never heard, you've never heard Jew them down? I go, yeah, and I'm a Jew. and he like shriveled. Didn't result in a sale. I go back to the station. Bob Newman comes down a couple of hours later, goes, how'd it go with the Board of Realtors? I tell him what happened. He goes, come up to my office. I go up to the office. Newman picks up the phone, calls the guy, and he goes, did you tell my salesman he could take his rate card, take it to the other realtors and Jew him down? Let me tell you something. The next time you do something like that, it's going on our 6 o'clock news, and you can just go shit in your hat. Click. So you said it takes one person. In my instance, it was Bob Newman.
Oh gosh.
But I think we've come a tremendous way. When they first legalized marriage in California, Eric and I were domestic partners at the time. And I said, I want to get married, but we're not going to get married until it's good nationally. Because basically they okayed it, and then they rescinded it in California, and then it was okayed nationally by the Supreme Court, the Bergefell decision. And then we got married. So we've been together. August will be 22 years since the flight, and 11 years married.
Yeah,
So.
well, that's lovely, Bruce. I was speaking to a man who's in Australia now, but from Zimbabwe, and he was telling me that in Zimbabwe it's still illegal. And so we are so lucky to live in countries that are progressive in their thoughts with, moving forward. And, it's,
Well, I mean, I was very fortunate to work in Australia, where obviously it was extraordinary. Well, the gay thing was accepted. As a Jew, that was kind of an interesting standout. I don't think many people that I ran into in Brisbane knew many. Was a very interesting Holocaust museum in Sydney that I visited. That at the time all their docents were Holocaust survivors who had they were the Shanghai Jews. Shanghai, China took in many folks escaping from Germany.
Oh wow! I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yep. And so those were really the first Shanghai survivors that I'd met. So that was, but once again, that's 30 years ago. Yeah. So I imagine many of them are since gone.
Yeah. But, I have heard that the Sydney Jewish Museum is amazing, and I will have to put that on my list to go next time. Yeah. Not I get to Sydney very often at all, but I'd love to go there and have a look. And it's just such an important part of our history, isn't it? And
getting to your point too. I think I never lived in what I grew up in a semi-Jewish, quote unquote, ghetto, just because it was a lovely suburban community that Jewish families emigrated to from Brooklyn and Queens in the 50s. But as I said, it was Jewish on the one hand and Irish and Italian Catholic on the other side of this road, and we could take the Long Island Railroad in, and we were around everything. When I moved on my own, I never resided in a gay ghetto. I never resided in like a Greenwich Village or West Hollywood. I always wanted to be in a diverse community. So Eric and I live in a condo complex that's on an old movie ranch. And there's gay and straight and black and white and Asian and Indian and young and old. And I believe that kind of heterogeneous makeup is what is so wonderful, because we learn from one another and we're all comfortable with one another. And we, for the first time in my life, we've been in this complex now for 15 years. We know all of our neighbors. We may not be best friends with them, but we know all of them. And they know and accept us. And I'm glad that I've never had to go to a place that is strictly gay, because the place that I was escaping from was so horrifically anti-gay. And I totally understand that. But I think it's important that people outside of our sphere know us. And the way to education, the way to combat hate is with knowledge and love, and the fact that you help somebody and you make somebody feel good and they find out more about you. And really, so gays can do that, or Jews can do, oh, that's interesting. And it's just I think that's how you move forward.
I have this idea, that we're all here, we're all trying our best, we all have our struggles, and isn't it better just to accept everybody for who they are and what they are, and just get on with it, and because we hopefully all going to end up in the same place. Or
the death rate is holding steady at 100%.
Exactly.
There's a piece of data that you can't argue with.
Oh gosh, Bruce, thank you so much. It's been
this has been so
pleasure.
Wonderful. Thank you for taking me down memory lane. Unfortunately, there for the most part, the good balances out any bad. And once again, I think the big question is, okay, what's next?
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
Look forward to the adventure. So thank you so much for the opportunity.
No, thank you. And if you're ever in Australia, you'll have to come and visit us on our cattle property, and we'll show you what the real Australia is.
Absolutely. I absolutely, I need to get there. That may be what's next in a couple of years. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Bruce. Really appreciate it.
Be well. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching and listening to my interview. If you'd like to hear more inspiring stories, subscribe to my YouTube channel or my podcast, and follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Life Journey TV.